Good morning, everyone, online and here in the room. Thank you so much for joining. You need to put a headset to be able to follow us. Please, everyone, could you use the headset? Otherwise, you won't be able to hear us. And those in the room, you should select channel number 5. Apologies to the colleagues online. We'll wait for the audience here to put on their headset. Okay, so it's channel number 5. So thank you so much again for joining us early in the morning online and here in the room. We're very pleased to host you in this session focusing on the role of ROMEX, and we'll go on telling you a bit more what ROMEX stands for and its role in measuring the wsis implementation, the action lines, ahead of the wsis plus 20 review. I'm very pleased to introduce you an excellent lineup of speakers here with me. And everything okay? Yes? Okay, sorry. We're joined today in the panel by Dr. Taufik Jelassi, the Assistant Director General of UNESCO for Communication and Information, who will deliver opening remark, the keynote. And I think without any further ado, I'll give the floor to Dr. Jelassi, and then we'll go into the discussion and I'll introduce my panel. Thank you so much, ADG, for being here, and please, we very much look forward to your keynote remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatevik. Dear panelists, participants, friends and colleagues, I'm very pleased to join you for this session on ROMEX, driving wsis implementation and digital cooperation. I would like to thank IGF for their support to UNESCO and for providing this opportunity for us to have an exchange on this topic. I'm also grateful to our speakers, Fabio, Henriette, Dorcas, and Chris, who will be shortly introduced by the moderator. Their expertise and commitment have been instrumental in advancing the UNESCO work on Internet universality. As the wsis plus 20 review is underway, we are reminded that digital technologies are evolving faster than the frameworks that are designed to govern them. And yet, 2.6 billion people remain offline as of today, most of them in the least developed regions. In low-income countries, only 27% of the population uses the internet, compared to 93% in high-income countries. The cost of access, the lack of infrastructure, the entrenched inequalities, including gender gaps, continue to hinder digital inclusion. UNESCO has been advocating for a rights-based, human-centered, and inclusive vision for the digital age. This framework gives emphasis to openness, accessibility, multi-stakeholder governance, and capacity building. To ensure that this vision is not only aspirational but actionable, we need the right tools to identify gaps, guide reforms, and measure progress. And this is where the ROMEX framework comes in. Since its initial launch back in 2018, and with the second generation indicators, which we released last year, the ROMEX has become a strategic enabler for national digital assessments. It supports evidence-based policy making by helping countries assess their digital ecosystems through the lens of the ROMEX principles. Those who are not familiar with it, let me briefly remind you the elements of the ROMEX are standing for human rights, O for openness, A for accessibility, and M for multi-stakeholder participation, And the X refers to cross-cutting issues such as sustainability, gender equality, and online safety. The revised indicators include new dimensions such as AI governance, environmental impact, privacy, and meaningful connectivity, aligning the framework with the global milestones such as the Net Mondial +10 and the Global Digital Compact. So far, more than 40 countries have applied the Rome-X framework. In Argentina, as an example, the National Digital Assessment informed a legislation to reform data protection laws. In Paraguay, the National Statistics Office began collecting disaggregated digital data. A Rome-X capacity building workshop took place in Fiji earlier this year and has inspired digital policy planning involving national stakeholders. Countries like Brazil and Uzbekistan have begun the pilot implementation of our second generation indicators. These outcomes are not isolated. They reflect a growing recognition that data-driven inclusive governance is critical for the digital age. However, the digital divide continues to persist, especially for women and girls who remain underrepresented online and in digital policy making. The revised Rome-X indicators maintain a strong emphasis on gender inclusion, digital literacy, affordability, cultural norms, and safety concerns. This brings me to our call to action. We urge governments, regulators, civil society, and all stakeholders to embrace the Rome-X as a strategic tool to drive digital transformation. It offers a robust, adaptable, and forward-looking methodology to monitor wsis implementation, align with SDG targets, and ensure a digital development that is transparent, equitable, and accountable. As the historian Melvin Kranzberg reminded us, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. End of quote. The impact of technology is shaped by human intent, by the choices we make, the values that we want to protect, and the systems we design. Let's develop, use, and govern technology in ways that promote shared progress. Let's put people, rights, and equity at the center of our digital future. We believe that with the Rome-X, we have the means to achieve that. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, JDG, and thank you for setting the stage and giving a comprehensive overview of what Rome-X stands for and giving a few examples of how we demonstrated its value and power. And now I'll go, and thank you so much again for being here. I know you won't be able to stay till the end, but we very much appreciate and value your presence. As you gave the overview of the Rome-X, just to also mention that in addition to demonstrating the value of Rome-X and showcasing a few examples, including how it has been introduced now in Brazil and Uzbekistan, the revised indicators, the session will also focus on demonstrating the relevance of Rome-X in a framework in assessing the progress on wsis commitments and the SDGs. And I'll go forward and introduce my speakers in the speaking order, but not in the sitting order. Fabio Sene, who is a project coordinator at the Regional Center of Studies on Information and Communication Technologies, CETIC.br, which is also a UNESCO Category 2 institute. Fabio has been involved in, of course, the initial IUI framework development. Brazil was the one who piloted the first assessment, and the first one to pilot the new revised indicators, which we launched in 2024 last year at the IGF. I have Elliot Esther Heisen, who is a human rights defender and computer networking pioneer from South Africa. She's a pioneer in using, everyone knows IDF, in internet and communication technologies. She's a former chair of the multi-stakeholder advisory group of the IGF. She used to be the executive director of the Association for Progressive Communications, and she still continues work with the APC and with many other entities, and including with UNESCO, and she's been instrumental in both development of the initial indicators, the revision, and also the implementation of the workshop in Fiji. Online, we are joined Dorcas Mutoni, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Open World, a specialist computer software company she established in Kenya when she was only 24 years old. And finally, I have Chris Buckridge to my right, who is an independent consultant, analyst, and commentator in the internet governance and digital policy space. He worked for more than 2 decades with regional internet registrars, starting with APNIC. He's a current MAG member, and he has many other roles, which I will not read out. And I am joined also online by 2 of my colleagues, Davide Storti, a program specialist at UNESCO for digital policies and transformation. Davide is coordinating our activities related to wsis, and I'm also joined by my colleague Camila Gonzalez, who also works on ROMEX initiative. So thank you again. And I would like to start by giving the floor to my colleague Davide Storti, who would just give a little bit of more overview on this interaction of ROMEX and wsis, and how the idea came about using the ROMEX to measure the wsis implementation. Please, Davide.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tadevik. Yes, so as ADG Gelassi has mentioned, the technology goes super fast, and UNESCO has highlighted already a number of occasions the different shifts that happened in technology and any society. Therefore, when we're considering the wsis as a process and the action lines that are laying down the foundational aspiration of the wsis process, like access, inclusion, rights, the ROMEX indicators translate these ideals into measurable outcomes, are one of these tools. And the connection between the wsis plus 20 and the different challenges brought up by these shifts are through the lenses of the IUI indicators are the possibility of measuring the advancement of digital technologies, like the artificial intelligence, the impact of digitalization, the status of indicators like gender equality or rights online of population, and also have a measurement of data protection, trust in the media, and misinformation, for example. So this framework may actually help or support the measurement of how wsis plus 20, the wsis framework, which is based on principles, how this evolves, how this is anchored to the reality by allowing to catalyze some evidence-based results, and also collaboration among the different stakeholders of the wsis process. It provides, I should say, a common language for different stakeholders, a country-to-country reporting, also analysis, also a way of comparison to highlight the different position evolutions, as was mentioned a lot of big chunk of population is not online yet, so there are different aspects to be taken into account, and also give inputs to dialogues like the IGF through national and regional analysis of the progress, and give some sort of diagnostic for guiding different investments by country or different needs assessment, and also needs in terms of policies and regulations, etc. So in the different action lines of the WSIS, the ROMIX provides some grounds for tracking participatory and transparent digital policy making, for example, or how to examine the connectivity and how affordability comes through, and how digital skills come through, maybe giving some granular ways to measure online safety, data protection, strategy for even cybersecurity, etc. So there is it's an opportunity to have a framework which has already some measurement, which has already been applied in different countries, and the new revision also helps us also to be more precise in this kind of measurement. So if you use it properly, and I think the panel today will give this the different point of view on this matter. I think the enabling of national level evidence of the ROMIX applied to different countries may give a better view of what is the global impact of the WSIS framework overall, and also guide through the review, also the findings of the indicators so find in different countries. It may provide also some grounds for the review itself, and for the future of the WSIS, that as the review will come up with that. Yeah, so I think I look forward for this discussion, and I invite all the IGF stakeholders to consider the IUI framework as one significant basis for the process of the WSIS as it comes forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Davide, for your excellent intervention and for your call to indeed adopt, also approach Romex under this lens. I think before I give the floor to Fabio, who will talk now focus on the application of Romex and give a few examples and show us the first impressive actually findings of the implementation of the revised indicators, which looks like this. And Fabio, bravo indeed that you had such already progress since the launch of the indicators. I wanted to acknowledge the presence of Guy Berger, who is sitting in the audience, who is the father of the original Romex indicators. Thank you so much, Guy, for being here, and I hope we can hear from you afterwards. But now, Fabio, please just tell us a bit more about the Romex in Brazil and the new application, and how do you think it was effective, the new revised indicators, and how were they perhaps a bit different from the first experience? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Tatevik. Thank you. Acknowledge all the speakers and panelists. It's a very pleasure to be here. And CETIC.br, NIC.br, and CGI.br is in the very beginning of the process of the ROMEX, also the creation of the framework and also the implementation. As you said, Brazil was the first country to pilot this framework back in 2018, And now we accepted the challenge that Mr. Gelassi presented us in back in December in the past IGF to renew the data collection on Brazil on the new second generation version of the indicators. And we accepted this challenge and concluded the data collection phase of the project. I will bring here some initial results, but of course it will go through a multi-stakeholder validation and we don't have the full report yet, but I'll bring to you a few main results. Just to mention, as I said, that Brazil was involved in the discussion of the framework, along with lots of consultations on a multi-stakeholder community. And back in 2019, we launched the first assessment report of the country in the IGF 2019 in Berlin. And then along this process, we also supported other countries, especially Latin American countries, to also implement this methodology. So we had lots of exchange during this period. And from 2023 to 24, we also supported UNESCO in the revision of the indicators, the 5 years revision that was expected to be concluded by UNESCO. And now we are presenting, we are implementing the next version. Here, just to highlight a few preliminary findings of the discussions. First of all, if you take the case of Brazil, and this is important to say that in our case, CETIC.br and NIC.br are responsible for data collection, and to deal with the technical team that are collecting all the indicators from multiple sources. But we have a multi-stakeholder advisory committee with the CGI.br, which is helping us and supporting us as advising the whole process. We have a first meeting of CGI that validated the start of the process, and now after the data collection, we will have validation from the CGI. But if you take and if you can say a few advancements and challenges that we have so far. So in the past years, Brazil has seen an intensification in public institutional debate on platform regulation and information integrity, as David mentioned here, is also a wsis plus 20 topic, and driven by the growing impact of disinformation, hate speech, and how this affects the democratic processes. And discussion has focused on the responsibility of digital platforms in moderating harmful content and protecting users' rights, especially in the light of judicial interventions that took care in the country, especially in the electoral bodies. However, we don't have yet, there's a lack of consensus on how to approve a specific legislation in the topic, and the debate is still fragmented in different political interests. And while there's a legal framework in place in the country, anchored by the Marco Civil, the Internet, and the LGPD, which is our local GDPR, the enforcement of this process is still uneven, and there's still critical gaps persistent. If you take the openness dimension, it's very interesting because over this past 5 years, we have a huge advances in the provision of digital public services, and also with this dimension of DPIs. So, for instance, we have at the platform gov.br in Brazil nowadays offer 4,500 services online with more than 160 million users. And these initiatives supported administrative processes and increase access to public information and a more participatory government. However, these gains are not equally distributed, so there is still significant inequalities in access to these digital online services, especially among population with low digital literacy, limited connectivity or disabilities. So there are usability challenges in compliance of these many governmental platforms, and the benefit of this digital transformation are uneven and are still reinforcing digital inequalities. In terms of access, we can also see huge increases in the connectivity, in spending a very basic connectivity. So you have 82% of households now connected to the internet, and significant investments in bridging coverage gaps in the country in this period. However, and also the concept of universal and meaningful connectivity has entered in the national policy conversation and debate, and being addressed in several strategic plans that are under discussion. But there's a growing recognition that we have challenges. So connectivity remained unevenly distributed, with rural access and lower income groups, especially low income classes, facing disadvantages. Gender and racial disparities are also relevant. So we show in the report, for instance, that Black women presents lower level of meaningful connectivities over time, and those are exacerbated by digital skill gaps and a mobile-only access to this strata of the population. So there's a need to an equity-driven strategies that address these overlapping dimensions. In the case of multi-stakeholder participation, Brazil has a legal and institutional architecture that provides a solid foundation for multi-stakeholder participation through the Marco Civil da Internet and the institutional role of CGI.br, which embodies the principles of collaborative, democratic, and transparency governance. This model is internationally recognized and has supported inclusive dialogue, such as the Brazilian IGF that is coordinated by CGI.br. However, if we take broader digital policies, processes remain multi-stakeholder participation remain inconsistent in many ministries and regulatory environments. The inclusion of the stakeholders are still fragmented in terms of participation. And finally, to conclude, if you take the cross-cutting issues, one of the new indicators that was included in the framework is related to AI development and governance. So you can say that Brazil advanced in AI governance in the past few years with the launch of the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy and then the National AI Plan. However, the governance framework for AI is still in progress, with a national law under discussion in the Congress. In crucial aspects such as transparency, risk assessment, and rights-based safeguards are still unsolved, and also multi-stakeholder engagement when it comes to AI. And if you take one new indicators that is environmental issues, this is one that we saw largely overlooked in digital policy so far. So there is still issues such as energy consumption, e-waste, and emissions are not yet well integrated into the governance framework. So this is a challenge that we identified by having this new indicator proposed. So just this few overall remarks, just to say that we are now we are presenting here this preliminary results. We will enter now in a phases of validation in our multi-stakeholder discussion, and plan to by September October launch the final report. So that's it, and you can later discuss more on the implications of this. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Fabio, for presenting the findings, and it's very interesting to observe both the progress and also the issues that persist, and it's also interesting to see the application of these newly introduced indicators. I look forward to reading the report. I would like to now give the floor to Andiet. And Andiet, I would like you to please focus on Fiji. This year, for the first time ever, we introduced, piloted a new intervention in the margins of the ROMEX framework, following the assessment. We piloted this capacity building workshop to support the multi-stakeholder advisory board, but also the global. Not global, but the stakeholders, wider community in Fiji to implement the recommendations, focusing on basically digital policy making, policy implementation, capacity building, and having ROMEX assessment as basis and evidence for that. Andiet, would you please focus on that?
Thank you, Tatevik. Well, yes, it was a really interesting experience. So what we did was that Fiji, a relatively small country, had recently approved a national digital strategy. And they'd completed a national assessment using the ROMEX framework. So we tried to bring these together. I mean, and the first thing, I mean, your question that you had in the script was, what do you, and I want to stress, I mean, I'm glad you're not asking me all the questions because I prefer ad-libbing, but there was one question that you asked me, which I think is important, which is what should countries do to, when they're implementing digital strategies at a high level, what should they do? And I really think the answer for us was clearly consultation, collaboration, and connections. And what was, I think, the most powerful learning of this workshop, which was a policy implementation workshop, how you can use the ROMEX framework to support implementation of the national digital strategy, was that even after about an 8-month period of the people developing the national digital strategy, believing that they've consulted thoroughly 2/3 of the government departments, and we must have had about 8 different ministries, did not know about the national digital strategy. So there was this disconnect between the people who developed the strategy, who were convinced that their consultation process was perfect, and the people in the government departments who have to implement the strategy who'd never heard of it. And I think that's one thing you can never underestimate, the complexity of different parts of government. We're not even talking about multi-stakeholder collaboration here. We're talking about intergovernmental collaboration, about the complexity in them actually working together, collaborating, understanding who's doing what, and how they can make the connections between the different issues. I think for us as the team coming from UNESCO and people who'd been involved in the Fiji national assessment, I think we had a really powerful discovery. And that is that the ROMEX framework is not just suited to assessing a national internet environment. It actually works extremely well in assessing a strategy. Before it's being implemented, it could work as well as a planning tool and assessing a design of a strategy or design of implementation, and equally at the level of monitoring and evaluation. So in fact, what we found is that the ROMEX framework is suited to the full life cycle of policy development and implementation, from design to monitoring, learning, and evaluation. And I think sometimes we forget, people always talk about the indicators, but they forget that the indicators actually are there to help you answer the primary modality of the framework, which are questions. And I'm going to give you an example. So, for example, in theme F of the framework on social, economic, and cultural rights, which is in category R, the rights, the R of the ROAMX, the first question is, does the national strategy for digital development address economic, social, and cultural aspects of digital rights? And then there are indicators. One of the indicators is evidence of inclusion. Now, you can apply this question as easily to a policy instrument as you can apply it to the national internet context. And I think that's what we found extremely useful. And I think we also learned that in spite of their best efforts to develop this national digital strategy, it tended to be very sort of supply driven. It focused a lot on infrastructure, on planning. It did not focus on rights at all. It overlooked rights. It might have had an emphasis on data protection, but I think aside from that, there wasn't very much. It didn't explicitly address multi-stakeholder, even though it used the term multi-stakeholder. Openness was treated in a very narrow way. And when it comes to gender, there was virtually no content on gender. Some emphasis on girls and capacity building for women and girls. So I think that was the other learning, that even though people who develop these digital strategies are doing it to the best of their ability, and they try and be as inclusive as possible, they tend to overlook ROAMX. And I think that's the other thing that we found. There was a complementarity. There was a lens that was provided by the ROAMX framework, which really filled the gaps and connected the dots. You know, ROAMX actually started at a conference called Connecting the Dots. And I think it still plays that role to connect the dots between initiatives aimed at building digital literacy, building access to infrastructure. And then I think, Tadevik, the final thing I can share, and maybe we can come back to it, although our time is not that much left, is that what we found is that whereas the ROMX and the principles endure, I think they're very future-proof. The concept of internet universality was not future-proof. In fact, that people don't really understand, because they do have internet access. They might not have meaningful internet access, or they might not have equal internet access. But I think people found that concept of internet universality difficult to relate to. But they did not find the principles of rights, openness, accessibility, multi-stakeholder, and the issues covered under cross-cutting difficult to relate to. They even found the concept of an internet governance forum difficult to understand. We tried to propose the idea of a national internet governance forum as a way of building more collaboration around the implementation of the national digital strategy. But when they hear the words internet governance forum, it doesn't convey to them the idea that it is a forum that actually involves all aspects of digital cooperation and governance. And to me, that was a real revelation. So very useful, and I personally think that we have adaptability and utility in the ROAMX framework and principles that we're only just beginning to discover.
Thanks so much, Aliette, for these insights. And actually, I know we're behind the time, and as you spoke about the and I know you need to leave early, so I hope Chris and Dorcas online will forgive me if I ask you a follow-up question, mindful that you also need to leave early. Speaking of adaptability and looking ahead to wsis Plus 20 and the GDC, how do you think, could you elaborate on the idea of how ROAMX can help ensure that the next phase of the global digital cooperation is more inclusive and grounded in human rights and equity, especially in the global south?
I mean, I think in a way I've answered that already. I think we need to use the framework not just to do these periodic national assessments. I think that's very powerful. It works very well in a country like Brazil, where you do have an institution like NIC.br, like CETIC, you have the CGI, the Brazil Internet Steering Group. Because you can come back and you can reflect and you can fill gaps. But I think it also works well as a planning tool and assessing strategies and the implementation of that strategies. And I think it can also be used at a monitoring and evaluation level, and not just necessarily at a national level. I think that's the other thing. Sometimes you might find in a context that there is a lot of investment, for example, in digital equality and inclusion in your educational sector. You might have a very proactive Department of Education. You have collaboration with the private sector, with civil society, working on learning, and maybe not just on lifelong learning, not just at school level. And I think you can very easily then use the framework in that particular sector. You don't necessarily need the resources to conduct a fully fledged national assessment.
Thanks so much, Aliette, for those thoughts. I will now turn to our next speaker who is online, Dr. Dorcas Mutoni. I would like to invite you, Dorcas, to speak about a little bit about your experience as you had a direct impact on digital transformation in Africa through your work. So would you please highlight some of the biggest implementation challenges that you had in turning these policies and strategies, since we've been also talking about the strategies, into results on the ground?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that question, and also the opportunity to just contribute to this panel. I just want to speak around specifically, digital transformation across gender spaces, or the gender digital divide, as well as the small business sectors. And because this is something that I've worked on a lot in the recent past. And let me just say that one of the areas that we have found very, very challenging is just, for example, coming to gender. We want to assess and find out, is there any sex disaggregated data that's available for us to do the analysis in terms of how to understand, how is the penetration, for example? How is access? How are social norms affecting, adoption and inclusivity in terms of digital transformation? And what are the disparities in terms of technology adoption? And the truth of the matter is, there's hardly any data. This is very challenging, because then it means that this is one area that we are not really proactive in assessing. And I think now this would again also really impact national strategies. When you go to small businesses, there's a lot of uptake of technology, especially mobile-driven access, which tends to have a very strong social aspect. But we want to assess productive use of this internet to impact these businesses. And what you find is that you then struggle to find, data that you can rely on. And so what I find really outstanding about this ROMEX framework is that I think if we encourage a lot more national assessments, but also apart from national assessments, sometimes can, take time, because, you need to convince policymakers. You may not have a well-housed, government department that's keen on pursuing this kind of research, based on other priorities. Encourage other stakeholders to really take up these and help us access data that can allow us to have some baselines, some, points of reflection, and also encourage people to use that to take on certain actions that begin to change the trajectory. Because I know we are all very excited about many emerging technologies, but what you find is that there's a lot of people who only hear, but they cannot really be part of the productive elements of how these technologies help. And I think particularly when it comes to the gender digital divide, one of the things we found very challenging is how do we get women in leadership? Because we want women to come in as users, we want them to embrace technology, but when they're in the technical areas, how do we encourage them to go all the way up into leadership roles, into policy and decision-making roles? And how do we support, with reference to data again, how do we support their growth to that level? Because then they form the role models that will inspire other young generations. And for some reason, you find that a lot of women who succeed then want to go back and do something because they have had very lonely career journey. So that's one of the things that I found. Lack of really data that allows us to assess from these kind of perspectives is really one of the biggest gaps. Then when we think about ROMEX, we're working on something in one of my organizations called AFJIC, where we really support women growing in the technology field and pursuing their careers. And we are very interested in, gender equality. And we want to see, the women, take these opportunities. And so I found that the ROMEX framework is really a good element. I would really love to hear more about non-government implementations of assessments or processes, because this is very, very, very interesting to my organization in the sense that, we are working on, some, and monitoring and evaluation and learning framework on some women in a leadership program. And we want to find out, how can we use these kinds of frameworks that have been, worked on from different parts of the world and with a lot of, research into it, and we see how this can inform part of the initiatives that we take. And the other thing that's important, again, there's been a very big growth in terms of, interest in entrepreneurship. A lot of startups, all over the continent. A lot of developers going into this space, a lot of interest even from right from the university, people wanting to get into this space. And I think the question is, again, we need to find out how is this actually impacting the growth of really productive technologies that are locally responsive in our continent. And I think this is one of the things that would need to assess, and we have a reference, a baseline, then this would really be adequate to help people who take initiatives to support the reduction of the digital divide, whether it's gender or generally the participation from a highly productive level in terms of software development, whether it's in open source communities or otherwise, the growth of high scaling startups in the continent. This could actually, help inform governments who maybe take the initiative to take on these kinds of assessment, but also researchers who just want to establish, what's going on from different parts of the economy, across the continent. Because again, we are a very diverse continent, very different countries, very different levels. But the only thing that we cannot deny is that we all want to be, completely digitally enabled economies. And the question is, where does everybody stand, and what should you really be focusing on to increase access, to increase inclusivity, to encourage a lot of stakeholders to participate, and also just have, a bit more use, a bit of, a lens that is less, control based to more of catalyzing the growth of these sectors. We really don't want to have the bias where, fear is a big component of how new technologies impact our economies, but we want to see this take on from the powering of these economies and supporting a lot of communities that have really been, on the periphery, women, young people, and the initiatives that might need to go, for example, to the education systems to really change how we prepare students for future careers, or to be, players in ways that they look at how do we digitally enable economies based on, which aspect of the industries they sit. So from where I sit, I found that, the ROMEX framework is really a really good way to assess that. I know we have a national strategy, for example. We have had that in Kenya for a while, where I live. But I know that it would be very beneficial if we had a chance to interrogate these parameters in terms of what progress are we making and how many steps are we moving forward versus how many steps do we move backwards, every time we feel challenged by the advancements of technology. So these are some of the comments that I would be able to share at this point, and I'm happy to stay in and take any questions that come through later.
Thanks so much for your valuable inputs, Dorcas. And indeed, you mentioned data gaps, which is a major issue across all the countries where we've implemented the ROMEX. And what we tend to do is turn these gaps into policy recommendations and indeed encourage the data gathering and also its availability. And I'm very actually pleased that Kenya was one of the first countries, along with Brazil as well, to implement the ROMEX indicators and also to do the first follow-up assessment to measure the progress they've made. Now I'd like to give the floor to Chris and ask you, Chris, to please speak. You have a really long-standing engagement with the internet government processes. Based on your experience, could you please elaborate on how do you see ROMEX contributing to more concrete, measurable follow-up on wsis commitments? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tatevik, very much for having me here. I feel quite inexpert, really, in comparison to many of my other speakers here today, who've been far more involved in development of the ROMEX principles, in implementation of the assessments. My own experience of it has been a little bit more piecemeal, sort of watching and observing the development of this, dipping in occasionally in events such as this. And most recently, that was in an event at Eurodig, which is the European Dialogue on Internet Governance, a national, one of the national and regional initiatives in the internet governance space. And I think, you know, it's very fitting in ways that this first session we have today of the IGF 2025, even if it's perhaps meant a few less people in the room, it's a good opportunity and a time for us to consider the ROMEX principles, consider this project and how it fits into the broader internet governance space, because I think it is a really important a practical development here. And I mean, I'm going back to some comments or a phrase that Mr. Jalassi used in his comments at the beginning, data-driven inclusive governance. I think this year, as we're heading into the wsis Plus 20, as we're very focused on how internet governance, how digital governance is evolving, that idea of data-driven inclusive governance is really important, because those two concepts are very mutually supporting of each other. Data-driven, it cannot be comprehensive unless it's inclusive, unless it's drawing in all aspects of the community. But at the same time, inclusive governance can't be effective, can't be practical unless it is data-driven, unless it's grounded in the kind of practical knowledge and awareness that a ROMEX assessment can provide. So I think the ROMEX principles, as we look to the evolution of internet governance, as we look to making, you know, practical, output-focused implementations of internet governance, this is a really important example that can be leveraged and can be developed and utilized by the whole community. I think in that sense, what I would sort of see as an important discussion in the context of the Internet Governance Forum, in the context of its wider network of NRIs, national and regional internet initiatives, is how these two, how that can all work together, how it can be complementary. I think the examples that Fabio spoke of in Brazil are really important, that sort of utilization of nic.br, cgi.br as a multi-stakeholder element of the assessment process. The ROMEX assessment process always includes that multi-stakeholder advisory committee. And many countries won't have that situation that Brazil very luckily had of having a pre-existing institution that could serve that function. But I think that in itself is a real opportunity, because we can see, you know, there are two possibilities here. There is the possibility of a ROMEX assessment being initiated and actually using or working closely with an existing national or regional initiative to provide and foster that multi-stakeholder input. But on the other hand, if there is not a pre-existing national or regional initiative, a Romex assessment and its multi-stakeholder advisory committee could be a really useful catalyst for developing that kind of sustainable, ongoing multi-stakeholder engagement by the community. And that's going back to a bit what Henriette was saying. Both Romex assessment can be a one-off or can be a recurring tool, but it can also be sort of a method for generating and fostering sustainable multi-stakeholder engagement in these digital governance processes, in these digital governance understanding and development. So I think the opportunities for complementarity between Romex and everything else that is developing and going on in the internet governance space is really important, and I think it's one reason why it's so good to be talking about it here at the Internet Governance Forum.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thank you so much for pointing out to national collaboration and work with national and regional initiatives, IGFs, and we indeed call on the national and regional initiatives, and we stand ready to work with them to advance and to unroll the assessments of Romex at their local context. I think, mindful of time, I wanted now to open the floor to the audience, both online and in the room. If you have any questions to any of the panelists, any reactions or feedback, I would be very interested to hear from Guy Berger as the father of the Romex, as I mentioned. I would be delighted if you could start the interventions from the audience, please.
They have to go to the mic.
You have to go to the mic.
Thank you. Hello?
Yes, we can.
Yes, you can hear.
We can hear you. It's okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yes. Thank you so much for the presentation, and wonderful to see this system evolving and being the subject of a panel like this. So it just struck me that for some people in the dazzle of AI, they may think that the term internet universality is quaint and old-fashioned. But actually, of course, we would not have AI, we would not have data in AI if we did not have connectivity. And the important thing, I think, about this term internet universality is it sensitizes us, as was said, that many people don't have connectivity, and that impoverishes everybody. But second of all, that connectivity is about not just people having access to content and services, but people having access to produce content and services. And so if we really want to see a world with many more alternatives to the big digital players, if we want to see much more content in local languages, then we've got to put this emphasis on internet universality, because it is the foundation for everything else that's happening in the digital world. And so I think that this tool, these internet universality indicators, RomeX, is a really valuable way for a country to take stock of where the gaps are in terms of actually enabling their society as a whole to have equitable opportunities to become producers and creators in the digital economy, and to contribute to the global tech stack. And at the moment, we don't have that. We've got too many big dominant players and much too little participation reflecting the ground-up possibilities that humanity could have from these technologies. So I really commend these indicators as a way to produce an evidence base for progress that can really unleash a lot more participation, because if we don't have universality of the internet, all this other stuff is just going to be of limited benefit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guy. Would you like to react, please?
Yes, I would like to follow up on what Guy Berger just said. Guy just mentioned the importance of having digital infrastructure and connectivity in order to create content and services. And I would like to add a third pillar, if I may, which is the digital literacy, which is the capacity building and the capacity development for people to leverage the digital infrastructure towards creating content and services. I think these are three what I would call critical success factors to ensure this internet universality and meaningful connectivity. And here I want to refer to an international conference that UNESCO organized a couple of weeks ago, which is on capacity building in the fields of AI and digital transformation for the public sector. So again, the emphasis on the capacity building, because our studies, our surveys show that in order to bridge the gap, we need really to have this wide capacity building, digital literacy in this new digital age and AI era. Otherwise, people cannot be we cannot have this inclusive information society or this inclusivity that was mentioned earlier. So I think the digital skills and capacity building is a third key pillar. I wanted to add to what Guy rightly said. Thank you.
Thanks so much, ADG. Annette, did you want to react, or do we take
if there's another question, I'd rather take the other question. Otherwise, I'll react.
Any questions in the audience?
I think this.
No? Any questions online? I don't see any. Annette, you can go ahead, please.
So my reaction then is really just, I think, Guy, the concept of internet universality is just, as I said, I think digital inclusion is a more meaningful concept for people. I think internet universality is just harder for people to relate to. So that's just a reflection. But I agree with everything else you've said. And then in response to what Taufik said about digital literacy, I think the capacity development is absolutely essential. But I think here the Romex framework is actually quite useful to assess how digital literacy programs are designed, developed, and implemented. Because so many digital literacy programs are vendor-driven or actually just teach people how to use their devices. They're not linked with rights education, civic education, as it's called. It's not really enabling people to fully understand the complexity of the social media environment. And I think just even just using the Romex frameworks, diversity, gender issues, to assess a digital literacy program is going to produce a digital literacy program. So just you're absolutely right, but we have to also be realistic about the fact that so many digital literacy programs are themselves not connecting the dots.
Good.
Thanks so much, Annette. Are there any further comments or questions, whether online or in the room? I don't see any. So thank you so much. I would then now like to give 1 minute to each panelist to give their final reflections, anything you wanted to say. We'll start from Fabio. Please, Fabio.
Thank you, Tatovik. Well, no, just to stress a few more practical results that we can see in this process. I think one of them is that multi-stakeholder engagement is not good in terms of the process itself, but also in terms of the quality of the data you can gather. So this is something very interesting that we saw in this last implementation of the model. Many sources of information coming from the civil society, from the private sector, that are more or less hidden in official documentation. So this is very key for the process. And a second thing that it was already mentioned is the need for data disaggregation and to really understanding the topic. So, for instance, in gender gaps in Brazil, if you take just the main picture of access, basic access, you don't see huge gaps in terms of access. But when it goes to meaningful connectivity in a deeper analysis, you can see very huge gaps. So breaking the data and indicators into more disaggregation, I think this is something that ROMEX indicators can do for really not just giving a ranking on who is better and which country is better, but also to give a roadmap for action. I think this is the main characteristics of ROMEX indicators. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fabio, and thank you for pointing out the issue of the ranking. I think what countries have been valuing a lot is that ROMEX indeed doesn't do any ranking or comparison, and it's a fully voluntary assessment aimed at guiding and helping the countries. So this is something very important to point out, which has been appreciated by all the stakeholders. Chris, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you, Tadevik. I'll be brief here. I know we're wrapping up. I'll use my time just to agree very strongly with Guy's point about the link between internet universality and so much else of our digital society. I think that's a very live and active discussion at the moment as we're looking at the Internet Governance Forum. And as Henriette said, an Internet Governance Forum doesn't necessarily capture for many people the full breadth of what our digital society now means. But I think the ROMEX framework does a really good job of highlighting and reinforcing how interlinked and interreliant all of these aspects are. So, really important.
Thanks so much. Dorcas, would you like to have a concluding 1-minute remarks?
Thank you. Yeah, I would just like to say that I agree with the input that disaggregated data that allows us to pick up different perspectives. For example, gender equality across different areas of assessment would be really important, because without that kind of information, then initiatives will tend to be a bit general, and that could actually continue to then encourage persistence. For example, in the gender digital divide, which really, even as we were starting the forum, it was very clear that this is seen to be, one of the areas that we persistently struggle with across the board. And I think for me, I look at it not just from usage and adoption and access, but also ability for women to participate in the production and creation of technologies, and be decision makers and policy makers. This, again, is one of the other things that we need to look at, because then it informs how much we will inspire other generations to come into these areas, because it's a big gap. We struggle, in terms of being the only one in the room or no woman in the room when it comes to a lot of these opportunities. So that's very important. The other thing I could say is that the sustainability, when we get this moving, how well will we be able to sustain? And I think that's the purpose of having regular assessment is also very important, because then we know what we have achieved. Are we keeping up, or are we retarding, or what's going on? This is really important, because we cannot move this world backwards. We are only going forward. So if we get to know what's happening today and the actions that are being taken in terms of the policy interventions, then we can see the effectiveness of policy. So that's my input and final comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorcas, and also very, very much for pointing out the gender digital divide, which is one of the key issues that we're also trying to address and close this gap, of course, with support and collaboration with all actors. Ariette?
Thanks, Tadevik. I started off by saying that effective implementation of a national digital transformation strategy needs consultation, collaboration, and connections. And I think that, for me, is the strength of the framework. It does give us a framework to gather data that we need, to gather data that includes a gender disaggregated approach, but it also gives us a framework to do analysis and to apply critical thinking to how we design and implement and measure the impact of those digital transformation strategies. And I think those are extremely important. I think if we can think critically and analytically about what we do in digitalization, we are going to have more impact, and it will be more inclusive. I'm also very excited by the idea of the national and regional IGFs beginning to explore how they can use the Internet Universality Rome-X framework.
Thanks so much, Aniet. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Before I give the floor to ADG Jelassi for closing the session, I wanted to thank each one of you, Dorcas Online, David and Camila Online, Fabio, Chris and Aniet, and Guy, for your valuable contributions. I don't cease to learn every time we have a discussion around Rome-X. I am really excited to see the report on Brazil. Thank you so much for your long-standing support to Rome-X, and thank you so much for all the wonderful ideas and calls which we will take forward and take into consideration and action when we carry forward with the Rome-X implementation. Thank you so much again. And ADG, would you like to give concluding remarks to close the session?
Thank you, Tatevik. I'll be very brief. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants online, but also in the room, who came here for this relatively early morning session on day 0 of the IGF. Clearly you have shown commitment, engagement, and interest in the subject matter we focused on during this session. I would like to thank also the panelists for sharing with us their expert insights, but also the practical country experiences that you refer to. We have reports like the one I'm holding in my hand, which gives full details about the Rome-X framework and the Internet Universality indicators, the original document, but also the revised indicators as well. These are available online on the UNESCO website if you'd like to go through the details of what we discussed today. I think ultimately, as many of the speakers, including Guy Berger's remarks, it's all about digital inclusion. And in the United Nations, we have an expression that we use quite often: digital inclusion as to leave no one behind. Mm-hmm. This is very important. It's at the heart of the Rome-X, and it's along these 3 pillars which I mentioned and were mentioned obviously by the speakers: digital connectivity, digital literacy skills, and digital services and content. Stay tuned. If you would like to take this discussion further, feel free to contact us at UNESCO or one of the panelists featured in this session, and enjoy IGF for the days ahead.
Thanks, ADG.
Thank you. Well done.